Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The desert winds howled, sweeping across the barren wasteland. It was a world caught between death and dust, a place where time had little meaning. Here, under the strange twin suns, the last remnants of civilization had crumbled long ago, leaving only echoes of the past. The metal remains of his crashed ship lay scattered across the landscape, half buried in the shifting sands. Adam, a survivor by mere luck, stumbled through the wreckage, his body bruised and battered, his will to survive almost as broken as the ship that had brought him here. He had no idea where he was, only that it was the end. And then she came. In the distance, the shadow of her arrival was unmistakable. A sleek, silent ship descended from the sky, its dark silhouette cutting through the dying sunlight like a knife. It landed softly, barely making a sound, as though the very air around. It had been forced into submission. The door to the ship hissed open, revealing the figure that stepped out. She was tall, impossibly graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light, a silver-blue hue that seemed to shift with every movement. Her eyes, however, were the most arresting, sharp, luminous, and filled with a coldness that made Adam's breath catch in his chest. She was an alien. There was no question about it. The perfect executioner born and bred for one purpose, to wipe out humanity. He had heard the rumors, the stories of the beings from the stars who had come to destroy Earth. But the reality, of standing before one of them, was far more terrifying than anything he could have imagined. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, and the weight of her presence was crushing. Her name was Jalia. Her gaze scanned the wasteland, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto him. Adam felt a sudden chill race down his spine, his throat tightening with fear. She had come for him. He was the last human alive, and she had been sent to end it. Jalia moved toward him with calculated precision, each step measured and deliberate. Adam's heart raced, pounding in his ears as he staggered back, his hands instinctively reaching for something to defend himself. There was nothing. He had nothing left except his survival instinct, which, at that moment, seemed laughably inadequate. "Please," Adam managed to say, his voice hoarse with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You don't have to do this." Jalia's eyes flickered, but there was no softness there, only the cold resolve of someone trained for this very moment. She tilted her head slightly, studying him, her lips barely moving as she spoke in a language he couldn't understand. The words were sharp, harsh, alien, but even in the foreignness of her speech there was something human, something almost familiar, as if she were trying to process him, to make sense of his presence in her world. Adam swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "I'm just a man," he said, almost pleading. "I'm not the enemy. I never was." Jalia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. She had heard this before. She had been trained for this. Her mission was clear. Humans were a threat to her people, to her world. The last of them had to be eradicated. But still, there was something in his voice, something that made her pause. Her hand moved to her side where a sleek metallic weapon was holstered against her hip. It was the weapon she was born to wield, to end lives without hesitation, without remorse. But as her fingers brushed against it, she faltered. She had done this before, countless times, but not with him, not with this one. Her eyes shifted, back to Adam, his face pale and marked by both exhaustion and fear. But there was something else in his eyes, something almost pleading, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't his life he was asking her to save. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite comprehend. "Why do you fight?" she asked, her voice still distant, but tinged with something almost curious. She had never asked that question before. It wasn't part of her training. She had only been taught to eliminate, not to question. Adam hesitated, struggling to find the words. "Because I have nothing left to lose, but I'm not a threat, not to you, not to anyone." There was a long pause. Jalia stood still, analyzing him, her mind calculating probabilities, running through every possible outcome. She was a soldier, a weapon. She was not meant to feel, to empathize, but something in his words, in the rawness of his voice, pulled at something inside her that she could not ignore. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then, almost imperceptibly, Jalia took a step closer. Her gaze softened for just a moment, a flicker of something that might have been confusion, or perhaps curiosity. "Humans laugh, don't they?" she asked, her voice lighter this time. It was an innocent question, the kind one might ask a child, but coming from her it carried a strange weight. Adam blinked, unsure how to respond. Laugh? In the face of everything? The question seemed so absurd, yet it broke through the walls of fear and uncertainty that had built up around him. "Yeah," he said quietly, almost smiling at the absurdity of it all. "We laugh." Jalia tilted her head slightly, as if testing the word, letting it roll off her tongue, trying to understand its meaning. For a brief moment, she seemed more like a curious stranger than a killer. The moment stretched on, fragile as glass, before Adam spoke again. "Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage," he said softly. "Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." The next few days were a blur, long silent stretches where time seemed to lose its meaning. Jalia did not kill him. She did not even try. She observed, calculating every moment. Adam, still reeling from his initial encounter with her, could hardly comprehend why he was still alive. Every time he saw her, the same question lingered at the back of his mind. Why was she sparing him? There was no escape. The desert planet had nothing to offer, no resources, no shelter. But the two of them, he the last human and she a lethal alien soldier, had no choice but to coexist in this broken, unforgiving world. For the first time in what felt like forever, Adam sat still. The crash site was as desolate as the rest of the planet, the remnants of his once proud ship now little more than jagged scraps of metal. His hands were raw, his body bruised, but his mind was consumed by a far greater question. Why her? Why this being, this alien, born for death? Hadn't finished the job. He had to know. But Jalia was an enigma. The only sounds she made were calculated, deliberate. Her movements were quick, precise, as if every action was part of a greater design. And yet, sometimes, when he caught a glimpse of her during the rare moments of stillness, he saw something more. A flicker of hesitation, a crack in the wall of her icy resolve. It was during one of these moments that Adam made a decision. He would speak to her, find out what made her hesitate, what made her so different. The air was thick with heat as the sun began its slow descent on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren land. Adam stood by the wreckage, working at the meager tools he had salvaged from the ship. His hands were stiff, but his focus was unwavering. "Jalia," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "Why haven't you killed me yet?" She didn't look at him. She never looked at him when he spoke. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, scanning the landscape with that same unsettling precision. He could almost feel the weight of her thoughts, as though she were making calculations in her mind, weighing something intangible. "I was born to kill," she said, her voice low, clipped, carrying an almost mechanical quality. "It's what I've always done. It's what I was created for. I don't understand why you would ask me such a question." There was something almost vulnerable in her voice, the barest hint of something uncertain beneath the surface. Adam's heart skipped a beat, his curiosity flaring. "Because you're not like the others," he said, his voice quieter now, searching. "I saw it in your eyes. When you hesitated before, you didn't want to kill me." Jalia's shoulders stiffened. For a moment she was silent, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Adam had spoken the truth, but the truth wasn't something she wanted to acknowledge. It made her question herself, something she was trained not to do. "I wasn't programmed to feel," she responded sharply, turning to face him. Her eyes burned with an intensity that sent a shiver through Adam. "I was engineered for a purpose. Emotion is a weakness, an unnecessary distraction." He stepped closer, not out of Fear, but because something inside him refused to back down. She had shown him a crack, a fracture in the perfect soldier she was. He had to know more. "Then why did you ask about laughter?" he pressed, his voice soft but persistent. Jalia's expression darkened, and for a moment Adam thought he had gone too far. But then her features softened just slightly, just a fleeting glimpse of something buried deep within. "I've never understood it," she admitted quietly, her gaze drifting to the horizon once again. "Laughter. It seems useless. But when you said it, when you spoke of it, it was as if you understood something I don't, something I can't quite grasp." Adam hesitated. This wasn't the answer he had expected. He had anticipated the cold clinical dismissal that came with every interaction he had ever had with the aliens. But Jalia wasn't like the others. She wasn't just a weapon, she was more. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He didn't know what that more meant, but he couldn't ignore it. "Laughter is a way to survive," he explained gently, trying to find the right words. "It's how we cope with the worst of it, the pain, the fear, the things we can't control. It's a release." Jalia didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned her eyes back to him, studying him with a quiet intensity that felt more like scrutiny than curiosity. "You laugh to survive?" she asked, her tone almost incredulous. "Yes," Adam nodded. "It's not always about happiness. Sometimes it's about making it through the dark times without losing yourself, and sometimes it's because you're too scared to cry." For a long time, Jalia said nothing. The air around them seemed to shift, the moment stretching longer than it should have. And then, without warning, she did something Adam didn't expect. She laughed. It was short, sharp, and almost mechanical. But the sound of it, it was like the crack of ice, something fragile and unexpected. Adam's breath caught in his chest as he watched her, confused but captivated by the sound. She had laughed. And in that moment, the world around them seemed to stop, frozen in time. He saw something change in her eyes. Not a softening exactly, but a moment of understanding, of connection. For the first time, she wasn't just a killer. She wasn't just an executioner. She was a person, someone who could feel, someone who could question the very thing she had been designed to do. And for the first time, Adam didn't see a monster. He saw someone trapped in her own existence, just as lost as he was. The silence between them deepened. Neither of them knew what to say next, but in that stillness something shifted. A bond, fragile, uncertain but real, began to form between them. The killing instinct that had once driven Jalia felt distant now. There was a new emotion rising inside her, one she had never been trained to understand. Adam didn't know where this strange path would lead, but he was certain of one thing. It would be a path neither of them could walk alone. Days passed in a slow, suffocating rhythm, like the steady beat of a drum that neither of them could ignore. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, its barren expanse now a shared prison, a place where time seemed to lose its meaning. Adam and Jalia, once adversaries, had become something else. But what, it was difficult to say. Their conversations, sparse but growing in intensity, had opened the doors to understanding, but there were still walls between them, walls built on secrets, histories neither of them had been willing to face. Jalia had been born to destroy humanity. She had never been given the chance to ask herself why, to wonder what it might be like to stand on the other side of the blade. Adam had learned this about her. But there was still so much he didn't know, so much he didn't understand. It wasn't just the silence that hung between them. It was the unspoken tension, the knowledge that they were both walking a razor-thin line, balancing between trust and betrayal, survival and surrender. Jalia had spared him once, but that was no guarantee of mercy. She had done it because something had shifted in her, something deep and profound, but Adam knew that mercy was a fragile thing. The next time she raised her weapon, there would be no hesitation. Would there? For his part, Adam couldn't afford to trust her entirely, not yet. He had seen her eyes, cold and calculating every time she looked at him. He had heard her speak of duty, of a purpose drilled into her from the moment of her creation. That purpose didn't include empathy, not for humans. She had a mission. He was a part of it. And in the end, he knew the mission would always come. First, but it was impossible to ignore the strange growing bond between them. There were moments when Jalia's guard dropped ever so slightly, and in those fleeting instances, Adam glimpsed something almost human, a trace of vulnerability and uncertainty. It was a dangerous thing for him to hope for, but he couldn't help it. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, the air grew cooler, the stars brightening in the sky above them. The fire between them crackled, a small and fragile thing against the vastness of the world around them. They sat together by the wreckage, a few scattered pieces of old technology lying abandoned beside them. Jalia had been sharpening her blade, the rhythmic sound of metal against stone almost meditative. Adam, by contrast, was absent-mindedly, picking at the remains of the ship, trying to piece together anything that might help him escape this world. "Tell me about your people," Adam said, his voice tentative, as if he were stepping into a minefield. Jalia paused, her fingers freezing. Mid-motion. She didn't look at him immediately, but she didn't ignore him either. Her eyes remained fixed on the blade in her hands, her expression unreadable. "They are necessary," she said at last, her voice quiet, distant. "Without them, I wouldn't exist. Without them, there would be no purpose. We were created to protect the galaxy, to ensure balance. It is what I was made for." Adam watched her, his heart aching with the sadness that tinged her words. She was a weapon, yes, but she was also something more. She was a being caught in a system she had never chosen, forced into a role she had never questioned. "And your own feelings? What are they to you?" he asked, his voice soft, probing. Jalia didn't answer right away. The words, Adam realized, were more complicated than he had thought. She had been designed to be a tool, not a person. Her purpose, the only thing she had ever known, was to serve. She didn't know what it was to feel, to question, to choose. Differently. Feelings, she began slowly, almost as if testing the word on her tongue. "They're foreign to me. An anomaly. They only get in the way." Adam smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I get it. It's easier to believe that, isn't it? That you're just a tool, nothing more, but you're not. You're more than just what you were made to be. You're still... "What?" Jalia interrupted, her voice sharp and defensive. She looked at him then, her expression hardening once again. Still human. Still the enemy. Adam recoiled, the words hitting harder than he expected. He had pushed too far, too quickly. But Jalia's gaze softened almost immediately, a flicker of regret passing through her eyes. She sighed and set the blade down, the motion so deliberate it felt like a concession. "I didn't mean to," she started, but Adam stopped her with a small shake of his head. "I know," he replied quietly. "It's just... I can see it. There's something inside you. Something that doesn't fit. And maybe you don't even know what it is yet. But I'm starting to believe you're not just a soldier, not just a killer." Jalia's gaze lingered on him for a long moment. Adam wasn't sure what she saw when she looked at him, but whatever it was, it made her hesitate. Her eyes flickered briefly to the horizon, to the distant stars above them, and then she did something that surprised him even more than her laugh earlier. She stood, her form tall and imposing, casting a shadow over the fire. Without a word, she walked over to where Adam sat, her movements fluid, predatory. She reached out and, before he could react, placed her hand on his shoulder. A firm but careful touch. Adam's heart skipped a beat, unsure if he should pull away, unsure of the intentions behind the gesture. But she didn't pull away. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as she said, "You don't understand, Adam. You don't know what I've been made to do." "I know," he said softly, staring up at her. "But I know you're more than that." Jalia's expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Then, without saying another word, she let her hand fall away, retreating back to the shadows of the desert. The weight of her touch lingered in the air between them, a spark of something that neither of them could explain. And though the desert was still as ever, something had shifted. The lines between them had blurred. They weren't allies. Not in the traditional sense, but they were something else now, something unspoken, uncharted, and dangerous. The tension between them had grown thicker, suffocating even. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, was a complicated web of fear, curiosity, and something more fragile: hope. The days on the desert planet had become less about survival and more about a delicate dance between two beings who for the first time were questioning the roles they had been forced into. Neither of them had asked for this. Adam had never asked to be the last of his kind, and Jalil had never asked to be a weapon. Yet here they were, bound by the circumstances of their existence, with a future neither of them could control. It wasn't long before Adam realized that survival had become secondary to something else, something far more dangerous. He had begun to care about Jalil, not just as a person, but as someone who had opened a part of him he had thought was long buried. There were moments when she almost felt human. Her laughter, her quiet moments of doubt, the rare glimpses of something softer in her eyes. She was a paradox, a weapon with a soul, and the more time he spent with her, the more he felt the weight of that truth. But Adam was also painfully aware that, no matter how deep their connection grew, he was still a prisoner. Jalil was still a soldier, and that reality hung over them like a storm waiting to break. He could feel it, that silent, ticking clock, the time when the peace between them would end, and her true purpose would come crashing back into focus. It was the sudden arrival of another ship that brought everything into sharp relief. The day had been like any other, hot, barren, and suffocating in its silence. Jalil had been distant, as she often was when she focused on her training, her mind immersed in the deadly rituals that kept her sharp. Adam had been working on repairs to the wreckage of the ship, trying to scavenge enough parts to make a working transmitter to call for help. But the sun, as usual, was beating down, and he was about to give up when the sound of engines filled the air. At first, Adam thought it was just another hallucination, but then the sound grew louder, unmistakable. The unmistakable hum of a ship descending through the atmosphere. He turned to Jalil, his heart racing. She had already tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon strapped to her side. She didn't need to speak to tell him what was happening. He could see it in the way her body locked into a position of readiness, the calm before the storm. The ship appeared, cutting through the sky like a silver streak. Adam's heart leaped into his throat as the ship's silhouette grew larger. A rescue, a new threat. The possibilities felt endless, and yet they all carried the same weight of uncertainty. Jalil's voice broke through the air, her tone colder than Adam had ever heard it before. "They're coming for you." Adam's throat tightened. "For me or for both of us?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the descending vessel, calculating. She was already preparing for what came next. A cold, hollow fear settled in Adam's chest. Was this the end? Were they going to take him back? Was she going to turn on him? He had grown used to the uneasy silence, to the moments of connection, to the fragile trust he had come to believe in. Was it all for nothing? The ship landed with a thunderous roar, kicking up sand and debris in its wake. Adam watched helplessly as the hatch opened, revealing a group of armored figures, their faces concealed by visors, their movements rigid and methodical. The sight of them sent a chill down his spine. They were soldiers, just like Jalil, but unlike her, they didn't hesitate. Jalil took a step forward, her eyes narrowing, her expression unreadable. "They are my brothers and sisters. Soldiers. Of the consortium. They will not care for your life. Then why are you helping me?" Adam's voice was raw, desperate. "Why? Because I don't want to be what they are." She cut him off sharply, her eyes flashing. "I don't want to follow orders blindly. I want to be something more than a weapon." Adam's breath caught in his throat. She had said it out loud. The words that had been unspoken between them, the unacknowledged truth that both of them had been dancing around for so long. She wasn't just protecting him. She was protecting herself, too. She was fighting against the very thing that had made her who she was, As the soldiers closed in, Jalia stepped in front of Adam, her posture defensive, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. She wasn't making any move to attack yet, but the tension in her body was palpable. Adam's mind raced. He had no idea what was about to happen. The soldiers weren't there to negotiate. They weren't there to ask questions. They had one goal: to eliminate him or to capture him. And Jalia had to know that too. The leader of the soldiers spoke first, his voice cold and dispassionate. "Jalia, step aside. You are no longer needed for this mission. The human is to be taken into custody. It's time to finish what you started." Jalia's hand tightened around the grip of her weapon, but she didn't move. Her gaze locked onto the leader, her eyes filled with an emotion Adam couldn't place. Rage, regret, a fleeting moment of hesitation. "I can't do that," Jalia finally said, her voice low but firm. "Not anymore." Adam felt his pulse quicken, a wild rush of adrenaline flooding his system. This was it. He was about to find out where Jalia's true loyalties lay. The leader stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Then you're a traitor, and a traitor. Must be dealt with." Jalia's grip on her weapon shifted. She didn't raise it, but her stance had become more defensive, almost like she was preparing for a fight that would end with no winner. "A fight to the death, Jalia," Adam said, his voice shaking. "Please." She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. Instead, she made a choice. With a sudden, fluid motion, she threw herself at the soldiers, her blade flashing in the dimming light. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. She moved with a grace and precision that left Adam breathless. The sound of combat filled the air as she fought, desperate, fierce, but also protective. She was defending him. The battle was brief, but brutal. Jalia's movements were a blur, a dance of death that Adam could hardly follow. And yet, despite the ferocity of the fight, he couldn't help but notice the way she looked back at him. Once, twice, each glance a silent plea. She was protecting him, yes, but more than that. She was protecting herself. She had made her choice. There was no going back now. The soldiers were not prepared for her strength, her determination. Within moments, 2 of them were down. But there were more coming. And even Jalia, as skilled as she was, could not fight them all, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. And in that moment, Adam realized something. She had chosen. Not just him, but herself too. The battle was over in the blink of an eye, but its aftermath lingered in the heavy silence that followed. The desert, once still and desolate, now felt eerily quiet, as though the very land itself held its breath in the wake of Jalia's choice. Adam had never seen someone fight with such ferocity, such purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. She was fighting for something deeper, something beyond the mission, beyond the orders. She was fighting for the very essence of who she was, and for the future she had only just begun to imagine. He had always known she was more than just a soldier, but in that moment, as she stood over the fallen bodies of the consortium soldiers, her breathing heavy and ragged, Adam understood what she had risked for him. For both of them. Jalia wiped the blood from her blade with a quick motion, the metallic scent of the air mixing with the dust that had settled over them. She didn't speak, not immediately. There was no victory in her eyes, no satisfaction. Only the silent weight of a choice made. Her gaze locked with Adam's, and for the first time since they had met there was no barrier between them. Not the coldness of her mission, nor the distance of her past. There was only understanding, a shared understanding of what it meant to risk everything. "They'll come for us," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, as though speaking louder would break the fragile moment. "This won't end here. They'll never stop until you're dead, Adam." Adam swallowed hard, the enormity of their situation crashing into him. "I know, but even in the face of that knowledge, he wasn't afraid, not anymore. What he had seen in her eyes, the decision she had made, the way she had chosen him, it was everything. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. "What happens to you?" Jalia looked away, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. I wasn't made for choice. I was made to follow orders." Adam took a step closer, the heat from the desert sun still pressing down on them, but the space between them seemed different now. The distance that had always been there, the space between who they were and what they were supposed to be, had narrowed. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, unsure of whether he was ready for what it meant to cross that final threshold. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her hand resting lightly over his as though the simple contact could mean everything and nothing. "Then what?" he asked, his voice strained. "What do we do now? Just run? Hide?" Jalia's hand tightened around his for a fleeting moment, a brief gesture of reassurance before she let go. She glanced back at the wreckage of the ship, the desolate landscape stretching before them, and then at the path that led into the unknown. "I don't know," she said softly, her eyes distant as she thought about the world she had come from, the place where she no longer belonged. "I don't have any answers for you. All I know is I can't go back, not to them, not to that." Adam nodded, understanding. He had never had any answers either. All he had ever known was the fight for survival, the endless struggle to escape, to find a way to live in a world that no longer cared for him. And now that fight had changed. It was no longer about just staying alive. It was about finding meaning in what came next. "I don't have any answers either," he admitted. "But I know I'm not going back either. I won't go back to a life without you." There was something in Jalia's eyes then, something like warmth, or maybe even hope. But it was fleeting, slipping away too quickly for Adam to understand. She turned her gaze back to the horizon, the weight of the choice she had made still heavy on her shoulders. In the distance, they heard the hum of engines again, a reminder that the world they had known was about to be irrevocably altered. It wasn't just the soldiers that would come for them. It was everything. The past, the chains that had bound them both, the memories of what Jalia had been made to do, the person Adam had been before this planet, before her, had changed. Everything. And yet there was something unspoken between them now, something that neither of them could deny. They had chosen each other in spite of the darkness, in spite of the odds. Jalia turned to him, her face hardening as the decision settled into her bones. "If we're going to make it, we'll need to run. Together." Adam didn't hesitate. Together. Without another word, they turned away from the wreckage and toward the unknown. The future was uncertain, but for the first time they faced it side by side. The desert stretched out before them, endless and unforgiving. But, for once, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. Because they weren't alone, the stars above twinkled brightly, as if to remind them that no matter how dark the world became, there would always be a light shining somewhere in the distance. A glimmer of hope, a promise of something beyond the horizon, a future yet to be, written. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would be a future they could write together. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves powerful tales from distant worlds. Don't forget to like and let us know in the comments, what would you have done?